My guest today has worked in multiple government organizations, ranging from the justice system, county government, and the U.S. military as a member of the Air Force. He has over a decade of experience training in the area of organizational effectiveness. He has shaped policy decisions and led initiatives in justice reform, urban planning, transportation, and public safety. He helps organizations explore complex challenges, communicate across boundaries, and innovate to solve big social problems. He's a member of the Air Force National Guard and holds a leadership position within the 149th Fighter Wing, where he is responsible for culture, morale, and effectiveness of the Mission Support Group. And last but not least, he works for the Austin International Airport as the business process consultant. Please help me in welcoming Kyle Boisjoli. I am so excited that you're here with us today. Thank you so much for your time. I am super excited about our topic today, workplace culture. And I know we throw around that topic all the time. And however, it seems like it might be something that's a little bit difficult to define clearly. So it's easier for me to think about, like, how would I define a positive workplace culture? It's one where they're nice to me. I know I can be my authentic self. And also it's about people that I know that can talk to me and they're compassionate and kind, and they act in a supportive manner. But you do a lot of work with organizations and their culture. And is it maybe, I'm guessing it's not just about the communication element. I'm sure there's a very smarter way that you define it. I'd love to hear what you think.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks for asking and thanks for having me on. This is one of my favorite topics, so appreciate the opportunity to nerd out just a little bit. I think about culture in a couple of different ways. So I think what you are keying into is this idea of whether people feel appreciated and satisfied. And so there is certainly a connection between what a lot of people I think would call morale and workplace culture. That's one side of it. That I like to explore a little bit more in depth is more the sort of unspoken values and the ways in which work gets done.
Right.
Some of these deeply ingrained beliefs about human interaction in the world that we live in and what can be predicted and what can't, that sort of drive how the work gets done. And so I've been fortunate enough to see some really cool examples of that throughout my career, and how it's like when you start a job and you come in thinking, I kind of know what I'm doing. I have some experience. And then you find out, that, oh, wow, that's interesting that people are doing this thing that doesn't seem to make sense to me. You recognize it when you're brand new, not so much after you've been there in a while and you've sort of internalized and rationalized that. But those are some of the things that I think are really interesting to pay attention to in terms of what drives behavior and results. And to kind of tie it back to the point that you made as you were asking the question about feeling like your management was kind and appreciated you and had good communication. I certainly think that when the stated culture gets too far out of line with what is the reality in the organization and what they're really trying to accomplish, I think that's when you see a lot of the dissatisfaction problems. With morale and what I think formerly folks used to call climate. So yeah, I know
Right.
that, yeah, there's a lot of different kind of words that you can throw out there: morale, satisfaction, engagement, climate, culture. So yeah, thanks for asking that first question, because it is kind of squishy, and I think
Right.
it's much more than just good or bad culture.
Right. So would we say that it's, to dumb it down for me, would we say it's basically how a company does things and why they do them that way?
I think that's fair. I think that's fair to say that. Would it maybe would it maybe help to give you an example?
Sure, yeah, yeah. Love examples.
Sure. So earlier in my career, I actually worked in justice for a while, and I did training for different justice agencies on different techniques and models for rehabilitation of offenders. And I love that line of work. I loved, working in the social work and community programming. And what I found as I traveled around working with different agencies is that a lot of folks had this sort of deeply ingrained belief that they existed to sort of contain the people who were dangerous rather than existing to really or help people change their behaviors so that they are no longer a danger to themselves or others. And so I remember this one agency that I went into, uh, when folks would come back from court hearings, they'd always be greeted at the door with the question of, did you win? And I'm like, well, what do you mean by win? Like, well,
Mhm.
did you get this person sent to prison? Like, oh, well, that's interesting that you choose to describe it in this way, because to me, a win was, getting someone a job and helping them make changes in their life. And so the more I spent time around this culture, the more I realized, oh, a lot of these folks are not really interested in the rehabilitation piece, even though that's what all the posters said in the hallway,
Right.
right? And so that's one of those areas where the deeply ingrained sort of invisible belief did not align with the actual mission of that organization.
Yeah, that's fascinating. How that changed to a win-lose philosophy and way of being and way you approach everything. So yeah, and you really hope and pray that that organization, that agency, and the government really is about rehab and not about just locking people up and throwing away the key. So yeah. um so and I know that you've probably got some really great stories such as that one, and I know that you also did some work for the Department of Urban Planning, and they were having some real problems that were really hindering their progress within the department, but also could also hinder the city for decades of moving forward, right? So can you tell us a little bit about that experience? Just walk us through the story, what they were, dumb it down for me, of course. What they were experiencing and how you made a change with them.
Sure. So this Department of Urban Planning they had been using this process it was called the neighborhood planning process for many years, and the idea behind this is that they would sort of carve out these different geographies within the city, and they would go host meetings with those folks to try to elicit, a list of things that they wanted for their community,
Okay.
which in a lot of ways makes a lot of sense. Um, some of the challenges were that they kind of found out over time that it was not a very equitable process in terms of sort of who had power. It was also very cumbersome and time consuming for the staff. They had high turnover. They burnt through a lot of employees who really didn't enjoy this process. Some did, and they really believed in what they were doing, and that's great. But it was a lot of work for them uh, to go through this. And also, what we found is a lot of the residents who were being served by it weren't very happy with the results either. So it was, I think everyone recognized that something needed to change. There was not a lot of agreement on what needed to change. And so the director of this department sort of opened the call for his staff of, hey, I'm up for reimagining this. We can create something new. um, I would like you all to present me with some options on how to do that. And
Right.
so I sat in on some of these meetings with the staff to come up with what might be the next way forward, and they never really went anywhere. And so I kind of scratched my head at this for a long time. Usually the problem is lack of sponsorship from leadership, and in this case they had it. So something else is going on here, right? Why is this group unable to put any ideas on the table? And after listening closely to the conversation, because words matter, right? Kind of like that, win-lose example.
Mhm.
Um, what I found is that, someone would maybe critique something, and then it would escalate into this cycle of, critique of the critique. And, oh, well, have you read this article? Have you read this book? Did you see this study from so and so? And it was almost like this circular circular game almost of who could sort of cite the most obscure and academically dense works that were out there, which was interesting, but it also was not really a good way to actually produce new ideas. And so I recognized early on that, well, this is part of the culture of this group. This is how you sort of establish yourself uh, as knowledgeable and a good employee, is that you know all these things, and you can rattle off all these different studies, and you can shoot down anything that anybody else comes up with. So there's the cultural barrier that I kind of identified. So the challenge became, how do you break them out of this cycle and get them to create rather than just critique? And so that's where that's where I had to find a model that would help sort of get through this, and brought in the strategic co-creation model, which is one of many out there. It's a good one, but it's not the only one. And had to sort of set up this series of activities to help them create very small pieces, and really get focused on, let's try something and test it on a small scale and see if that moves us closer to where we want to get. So that's kind of trying to put it into a nutshell.
Right.
It was about a year-long effort to do this, but that's sort of that's the 5-minute synopsis of working with this group and trying to overcome that cultural tendency.
Right. And there's so much to unpack on what you said there. So the model, I believe the humanific strategic co-creation model, is that the model that you actually implemented there?
Yes, the company is called Humanific, and yeah, strategic co-creation. Yeah, when you say it all together, it kind of just sounds like word soup.
I'll be honest, a little bit.
Yeah.
But I think that it's, and one of the things that I read about it was really about teaching team members new behaviors in the moment, as opposed to taking them outside of, their normally daily work and then doing a class on, conflict resolution or how to be more open to new ideas and things like that. It's really, which I think is beautiful, because I think that anybody that knows me knows that I love to learn by doing, and anything that's experiential and interactive is something that I just eat up, because don't tell me how to push the button, let me push the button, right? So I think that that's amazing. And I think that those types of learning experience are so much more impactful and have such long lasting positive impacts. But I also think that another point that you made is that it's not a one and done sort of thing. This was a year-long process that you undertook with these people. And because some of these things were so ingrained in them that they really had to be untaught those things and retaught new things and experience how that new way could be positive for them. Am I right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. Yeah, I think sort of the tendency, the easy button, if you will, when you encounter a situation like this, is to say, well, let's just have a class and we're going to teach you some skills.
Right.
We tried that with this group, and it didn't work, because they didn't, once they got into their small groups and they started talking, they went right back into that like critiquing cycle. So I figured, we're going to have to do this right there in the context of the project. So let's work on the project. And when we hit the roadblock, okay, let's push the pause button and talk about what's happening right here. And here's what I want you to try is, here's this new technique. So let's just do this for 15 minutes and see how it feels, right? And so it's every single step of the way along that project, introducing a tool at exactly the right moment and having them do it in the context of a real world project, I think was really what they needed to overcome that cultural inertia that they had built up over the years.
So next is the section of the interview that I like to ask some rapid fire questions that you've never seen before. So I'm curious, Kyle, what motivates you?
Oh, rapid fire. So how quickly do I have to answer?
I'm not timing you. I'm not timing you.
Yeah, so I'm about to expose myself as a nerd here, but I was of the age where, when I was growing up, Star Trek: The Next Generation, that was my TV show when I got home from school, that I would watch every day that it was on. And if you haven't seen it before, one of the ideas behind this Star Trek world is that it's sort of like a post-scarcity, post-resource world, because technology is so great, we have everything we need. And so it was a fun thought experiment for me to see how do people on these other planets behave and interact, and how do they spend their time when they don't have to worry about, is there enough to go around? And so you
Right.
see all these cool things where some people are scientists and they just want to explore and discover new things, and some people want to learn to play different musical instruments and learn how to be theater actors. And so I always love this idea of just people being able to do what they love and what they do best, and sort of asking myself from a young age, what would it take to get us there as a society? And I think that's what drove me into organization development, of how do we create these environments within organizations where, you know, we have the right people who are interested in the same things that we're interested in, and create the right balance of structure where they can kind of flourish and experiment within, you know, their their passions of where
Right.
they want to see change. So yeah, it's really sort of the idea that people can spend time on what they really care about, and have the freedom to sort of experiment and try different ways to make the world better.
Yeah. No, I'm a big Captain Picard fan. Anything that Patrick Stewart is in, I watch. So I'm with you on that. And I've often thought about that, because I think about it in they say that they don't use money anymore. So just everybody has what they need and everybody plays to their strengths and their interests. Yeah. What a world. I don't know that I'll see it in my lifetime, but I hope that it does actually exist at some point in the future. So I love that. I want to take you back to you're not very old, so this will probably just be a few years, but your first management position, and what do you wish you would have done differently?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. There's a few experiences that come to mind. Probably, you know, looking back now, my very first management experience. It's funny, I didn't even consider myself a manager at that time. I was just a person who was really passionate about the area I was working in, and I had an idea of how to make. It was still injustice at that time. You know, how to make these programs run really effectively. And so I didn't even think of myself as, you know, a boss or even really a supervisor. I just had something that I cared about turning to a reality. And interestingly enough, that was probably my most successful run as a manager, because after that, you know, I started trying to, in future positions, learn about more about management and supervision and leadership, and totally got sold on, you know, the idea of, you know, empathy and really giving people lots of space and room to uh, you know, to kind of use their ideas and explore different ideas, and be collaborative, and be, you know, every problem is one that we're going to explore as a team and come to consensus on. And so I think then where I really remember going wrong was was approaching everything as though, you know, just everything's a free for all, just where whatever you want to. I'm
Complete freedom.
exaggerating. Yes, I'm exaggerating, but only a little bit. You know,
Right.
oh well, what do you think? What do you think we should do? Where should we go? And what I, you know, now can see is that I didn't provide enough structure or context, where it really just felt so open-ended that people felt lost. And so
Right.
what would I do differently? I would have, you know, maybe I would have still allowed for some freedom, you know, and autonomy, but I would have at least created a structure for them to act within. A
Right.
little bit of guidance and then
What are
good.
those guardrails that I'm working
Exactly.
within? Yeah.
Exactly.
I love that. I love that. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I'm thrilled about this conversation, and just thank you for being here. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. This was fun, Melissa.
That is today's episode. I would like to thank you, my listener, for your time, and for our guest, Kyle Boisjoli, for his contribution to the show. Look out for our next episode at tdaustin.org. Be sure to like our LinkedIn and Facebook pages. If you would like to be featured on this show, send your request to me at podcasts@tdaustin.org, or reach out to me on LinkedIn.